Am I audible? Perfect. Thumbs up on Zoom as well.
We can hear.
Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is actually one of our first time hosting the graduate seminar. So we have Emma from University of Michigan presenting, and we had Isaac who presented last week? Yes, 2 weeks ago. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Emma Dodoo, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. And I'm really happy to be here today and to talk about some of my dissertation work, which is about teaching computing to K through 12 emergent bilinguals, but particularly from the perspective of educators and how they have experienced challenges in teaching computing to emergent bilingual students, but then also about the strategies that they have used or the opportunities that they have used to support these emergent bilingual students as well. And so here is an outline of my presentation today. And so please indulge me as I tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Emma Dodoo, but I have a little bit of an embarrassing story. I came to the United States to pursue my PhD, having done 12 years in the British educational system. And when I got to Penn State, I declared my major to be information sciences and technology. And so this meant in order to receive my degree, I had to do many programming classes. And there was one class in particular where I recall having to do an assignment where we had to program a football field. And I was very comfortable. I was very excited to do this assignment because I played football. I thought I knew everything to do with football. And again, I was just very excited. So having done all the work to submit this, my program, I, submitted it. And when the grade came back, it was a very low one. And I was very confused. And so I went to office hours to understand where did I go wrong. And it was in office hours where I found out that I had indeed done a football field, but it was a soccer field like we call it here in America. And I left office hours feeling very embarrassed because, again, I thought I knew what I was doing. But it was that conversation I had in office hours that led me and question contextualization. Because contextualization is how we kind of understand experiences, how we interpret our experiences as well. And so you can also imagine the misunderstandings that arise from different meanings of words that we use in our teaching. And so I went to the University of Michigan, and I am at the University of Michigan trying to understand these gaps or these issues when it comes to miscontextualization, particularly in computing, but also at the K through 12 level. And so my understanding from the conversations that I've had with some of you today is that you are very familiar or have some experience with programming. And so I have 3 programs here that I hope are on all screens. And I'm hoping, take some time to look at it, but if 1 or 2 of you can tell me some of the similarities that you see, I would be most appreciative.
You're requesting information.
Yes. If you see any similarities among the 3.
All of our requesting.
Oh, yes, that's one of them. Is there anything are there any other similarities that any of you see?
friends ask the user to give their name, and then the next thing they'll print out hello plus whatever.
Yeah. So all of these programs are doing the same thing. But one of the takeaways that I have is that all the the 3 different programming languages are all in English. And so this is probably the instruction, but it's also the keywords that they're using in the programming languages. And so this suggests that there's limited English proficiency that can hinder one's ability to learn computing skills, creating language-based disadvantages, and even excluding some from opportunities within the field. And so, even though many think that coding is for everyone, we can probably say that coding is for everyone as long as they speak English. And this point that I'm making is very fundamental to my work, particularly in understanding contextualization, like the story I shared with you earlier. But for students who don't speak English fluently, you can imagine the barriers that they have in the classroom with how they interpret things, especially considering, again, all programming languages are grounded in the English language. And so the contextualization effect associated with the new technical vocabulary that computing holds can certainly be considered to multiply even more so for an English language learner or for someone whose native language is not English. And so let's get a little bit into the background. Computer science is widely associated with getting jobs in software engineering, maybe becoming a hacker, and jobs of the like. But the benefits are way broader in computer science, specifically that it equips students with computational skills. And this can be things like, how do I help think about things logically? How can I communicate my work better? So you're kind of breaking down problems. But these skills that you get from computational thinking prepare people better for the workforce, also provide foundational technological skills, and also foster innovation so that students aren't passive consumers of technology. And so they're actually creating things for themselves and maybe even for their communities as well. And so because of the larger application of computational skills, these broader benefits form the foundation of the Computer Science for All initiative. But what does for all actually mean? There are 4 ways in which we can conceptualize this or try and understand how we can include every student. The first question we can ask is, where are all of these resources to support computer science education coming from? And outside of funding, this can be, do we have qualified teachers? Do we have the right equipment? What curriculum are we using as well? We can also question who has the opportunity to learn computer science. And so this is getting into the access of CS. We can also ask who is able to participate in these learning opportunities. And it's kind of important to distinguish access from participation, because I'll get into that in a little bit, but we can think about how emergent bilinguals have to take required classes like ESL, if your schooling was like mine, and that can, or the time or the block in which you have to take that can restrict you from taking other classes. And so that's what I mean by participation. And finally, we can think about what are the outcomes of these computer science experiences. And it's important that we are looking at the outcomes because this is where all of our resources or where all our funding and efforts are going into. And so the Computer Science for All initiative began during the then administration, 2016, where there was a recognition of the importance in offering every student hands-on computer science or math classes that prepare them or to make them job ready by day 1. And so addressing these 4 questions has therefore been essential in understanding the challenges that hinder equitableness, if I can make up that word, to access in computer science education, but specifically talking about that in the United States. And so it's these 4 questions that also lead me to use the CAPE framework by Fletcher and Warner. And these class the 4 questions in the previous slide by capacity, access, participation, and experience for, to, in, and of computer science education. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm mainly talking about access and participation. And that again is who has the opportunity to learn computer science and who can participate in these computer science courses. So let me start with access. This data that I'm showing you, or this graph, comes from the annual State of Computer Science report. And the graph on the screens are showing the percentage of public high schools that offer a foundational computer science course. And we see that the proportion has increased from 35% in 2017, 2018 to 60% currently. And so even though it shows a decent growth or a steady growth over the period, surely 60% should not satisfy anyone who is interested in making computer science accessible or available to all students. Furthermore, we can see that by 2023, 2024, which is the current data, the number of states that report such data has only grown to 41, meaning that about 20% of states in the United States are not yet reporting the computer science data. Or we can maybe infer that those states that aren't being reported are probably underperforming in computer science, and that's why they're not reporting this data. And so moving on from access and zooming into participation, the pie chart shows the statistic from 60% of, again, the public high schools that have reported having a foundational computer science course. And it indicates that females barely make up 1/3 of the participants who are in these foundational computer science courses. And this is similar to how we typically talk about gender in computer science, but also in the general STEM conversations. We also need to address disparities in computer science, not just by gender, but also by race and ethnicity. And so currently, in the previous slide, we saw that there are only one third of these courses being taken up by women. But when we examine the ethnic or racial representation, like we see in this graph, we see that there are also significant imbalances. We can see that white Americans are appropriately represented, and it's also relative to their proportion in the population. We see that Black Americans here are slightly overrepresented, and that Asian Americans are highly overrepresented, and that Hispanic or Latin Americans are underrepresented significantly. And so these participation gaps highlight a high need for targeted, but also inclusive efforts to ensure that computer science education is accessible, but also representative of our diverse student population. And so these participation gaps align closely with my research focus, and they highlight the need for targeted, inclusive strategies to make sure that computer science education is accessible and reflective of our diverse student population. And so this takes me into the specifics of my research problem. And so why do we even study emergent bilingual students? Emergent bilinguals are often overlooked in research, and we're at a distinct disadvantage due to the language barriers. When we discuss access, when we discuss participation, The focus is often on race and gender, while language ability is often left to the side. Or it receives less attention, I should say, and clarify. However, there's been virtually no progress in emergent bilingual students and in their participation in a foundational computer science course in the last 5 years. And we can see that denoted on this graph. And so this takes me into my research question, which focuses on K-12 teachers and visits the teachers' attitudes and teaching methods that are meant to support computer science students. And again, this is looking at teaching methods in a United States context. And so a question that could be asked is, why even interview teachers? And it's first because most studies in this realm or in this space mainly target students and their student outcomes. But it's also necessary to interview teachers, to interrogate teachers, because they know their students best. And they are also best positioned and uniquely positioned to make the changes in the classroom. And you may also be wondering why K-12 or why study that level. And it turns out that for a great majority of public high schools, K-12 is where they get their earliest exposure and computing experiences. And emergent bilinguals are also the growing population within the United States, the highest growing at that. And so we can move on to some of my methodological, is that the right word? Approach, and then some of the findings that are in my work as well. And it's interesting that we're talking about contextualization because these are the things I mean. But to gather insights, I reached out to K-12 educators who had experience working with emergent bilingual students. We began with 27 teachers who were interested in this study, but then they were then narrowed by inclusion criteria, which was they had to be teaching a computing class and also had to have emergent bilinguals in those classrooms. And so once those criteria were applied, this reduced our participants to 8. The participants were then interviewed over Zoom, and then the data was analyzed thematically using Brown and Clark's approach to identify common challenges and strategies. That the teachers had to be in teaching computing classes, but also had to have emergent bilinguals within those classes as well.
Like inside of the classroom where they taught on it.
No, those were not in. And so from these interviews, there were 3 main challenges that emerged. The first was code switching leads to cognitive overload. The second was there are similar terms with different meanings that exist across different disciplines. And that teachers also experience low self-efficacy in computing. And so although these are challenges that teachers are seeing with emergent bilingual students, this is not to exclude all other students. These are also challenges that they see with other students in their classrooms. And so honing into the first challenge, code switching leads to cognitive overload. We can find that code switching between languages can be mentally taxing for students, particularly in subjects like computer science with complex syntax and specialized vocabulary. And I have quotes here that tell us what some of my teachers are saying. I would also like to point out that these quotes, again, because this is a small sample, I don't want to identify teachers, and so I have left names and things of the sort out. The second challenge is there are similar terms with different meanings that exist across all disciplines. And it reflects teachers' articulations that there are certain terms in computer science that have different meanings in other subjects. And so this can create confusion for students. But it's important to note that this is a separate issue from the language that we discussed in the previous slide. And so some of these terms that exist in other fields outside of computing are variables or algorithm or even methods. But the meanings differ in computing than in subjects like science or in math. And so this creates an additional layer of learning for the emergent bilingual student. Teachers also describe a third challenge, which is that they have or experience low levels of computing self-efficacy. And this is teachers who are not necessarily comfortable in the subject matter of computing and they tend to have the lowered levels of self-efficacy around teaching computing, which can impact their effectiveness and willingness to attempt these innovative approaches. And so we can see in some of the quotes that teachers are explaining that sometimes it's hard for them to make mistakes because they are afraid that their students will laugh at them, or that they may not have come into these computing classrooms with the background knowledge or the programming language knowledge, which can then be a struggle for them as they are also teaching their students the same information. But despite these challenges, teachers have also employed various strategies to support their students and to work with their students on. There were two that emerged from the data. The first being re-engaging students who feel overwhelmed, but also offering a variety of translation modalities. And so looking into these strategies a little bit more, teachers reported often struggling with grasping computing concepts, which led to students being disengaged in the subject matter. And so because of this, sometimes students may tune out when they don't understand what is going on. And so teachers have to make efforts and are also making efforts to re-engage their students back into the classroom. And this can be by group discussions, by the inclusion of visual aids like color or other representations that students can visualize to help emergent bilingual students better grasp these abstract computing concepts. Another strategy that teachers offered was having a variety of translation modalities. And this could be so teachers could break the existing language barrier, In ways in which they were doing this were trying to speak in emergent bilingual. In my case, it was Spanish, speaking Spanish to the class. And one of the teachers even said that, "Miss, you're the only person who tries to make this effort," which can go a long way. Other methods included using Google Translate or using ChatGPT. And so this was basically not just having or relying on the teacher, but also using these technologies to assist in the translation if a teacher couldn't necessarily do it themselves. And my work is still ongoing, but I'd like to share some of that in the next steps. And so moving forward, I have two primary steps. The first is working with teachers. And as I continue working with these teachers, I plan to co-design a programming tool that is actually tailored to emergent bilingual students. And this will be subsequently tested in classrooms following a unit of what a teacher is teaching that semester. Looking at students, I will continue gathering data to understand which approaches work best, but also explore how these insights can apply internationally in contexts like Botswana, where similar bilingual challenges may exist. And talking about this a little more, my program requires students to do what we call an ILE, which is similar to an internship. And I did mine last spring semester or winter semester, as we call it on our campus. And I had the opportunity to work with Computer Science Education Botswana. And this is where we used a programming language known as HEDI and provided students access during something called the Hour of Code. And in the Hour of Code, I, as well as my team, grouped the students into two, where they were a bilingual group and also an English group. And we compared the two at the end of the Hour of Code program to study the different student attitudes and experiences using a bilingual programming tool versus just the English or only English programming tool. And so this is some of the work that has been applied in an international context. A bilingual programming tool, which is a good question, is a tool that can support English and another student's native tongue as well. And so in the case in Botswana, we were using HEDI, the program, in English and Setswana, which is the local language to, or the major native language to Botswana. And so one of my core takeaways with this work that I am continuing to do is, well, one of the quotes I should say, is that for those reluctant to use strategies for emergent bilingual students, they often fail to see how these strategies can also enhance the experiences for all students. And so that's something that I would like us to all take away, if anything, from this talk. And so I'd like to, of course, give my thanks, my acknowledgement and appreciation to those who have made this work possible for me. I would like to thank my co-advisors, Mark Guzdial and Lisa Latuka, but also the University of Michigan and the NSF GRFP for funding me to, again, be able to do this work. Thank you. Yes, I can take any questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Phenomenal thoughts. I appreciate the context on it. I guess, what is the most surprising finding?
I think one of the most surprising findings, or in just my general experiences, is how we don't necessarily think English is a barrier. And so finding ways to include other languages in programming and in the broader computing context, and that can be the programming language, but also in our pedagogies, is something that I'm excited for, and I'm happy to see this work growing, not just with me, but other people in the computing space as well. Can you please say that again?
Software that are or most major programming only.
Yes, most programming languages, and I think I have that in one of my slides. These are common programming languages that we use, whether it's at the high school level or even in college. And most of them are in English.
So, K-12 education. We had a handful of interviews. I'm just wondering where the majority of the teachers land in K-12.
So are you asking where the teachers come from?
No.
Yeah. We did have a call out for all K through 12 teachers, but I think specifically in those that I interviewed, they came from grade 5 all the way to 12. And so we're seeing different experiences and learning different things that they try and that they experience, but also try and support their students with.
Some of the teachers, they were low on their self-efficacy. So, was that the issue that they were, why they were not subject matter experts, or like they had their original degree in some other degree, but they were tasked to teach foundation?
Yeah. So depending on the school and maybe even the district, teachers may not necessarily be coming in with a certificate in computing. And so maybe they get into a school, they get their job, and then they are expected to now include a computing class in addition to what they are there teaching. And so sometimes they aren't coming with that prior knowledge of programming or how to use these programming languages or computing. And so that's what affects their self-efficacy.
How many of the instructors were bilingual themselves? You asked that?
How many of the teachers were bilingual? About half of them were bilingual. And all teachers that I interviewed had Spanish speaking students.
How was it? You know, significant differences between bilingual instructors?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Whether I saw any differences between teachers who spoke English and those who were bilingual. I think one of the enlightening experiences, can I say, is that a bilingual teacher kind of notices the frustration and is quicker, again, based on my interviews, to assist or have ways and methods to address how to break certain concepts and technical words to an emergent bilingual. So I think that was an interesting difference between the two.
But I was asking, you mentioned some of them may not have one of them, what is their teach? You know, the difference between those, like, taught before, or level of experience with number of years teaching, and the practice of being teach.
Yeah, I collected the number of years that they had taught, but I didn't look at whether that had any effect to what other methods or practices they were including.
Bilingual.
Yeah, are you asking that as, yeah.
Bilingual.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you. Yeah. Are there any questions on? Yeah. They, not professors, they were teachers, yes. Yeah, I think that is a very good point. Trying to see the experiences of more teachers and interviewing them is a great point. I think that qualitative data gives a lot of enriching data, but I wouldn't be surprised and that I'm looking at more teachers further down the line to kind of see the experiences, and even not just including Spanish, but there are other languages that could also be looked at as well and seeing what those experiences are as well. They were not all high school teachers. They were middle school, high school, and then we had one primary school teacher. So we got no, no.
No, there aren't in the chat.
All right.
Please join me to thank Emma for this amazing presentation. Yes, so we don't have anything next on the agenda, so feel free to stay here, talk to Emma or whatever is next for you, but thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do you want pictures?
Yes. And thank you for all of you who came online as well. Much appreciated.
I'm just going to.
Oh, it's so good.
We do want the presentation. I can take pictures.
It's the one thing you missed.
So good.
Student.
I think, yeah, I think this started because of my own experiences. I'm multilingual. And so some of the things that I talk about, I empathize with when teachers were